Have you discussed with Sandy the impact on the marriage relationship itself if you were to prevail in this lawsuit?
Yes, of course we have. We've talked about it, and Sandy's been married before, and so, you know, I really envy her having had that experience, but we both believe that there would be a settling and a deepening of our commitment if we could go through with this instead of feeling like it's everybody else's decision.
Did you, prior to the filing of this lawsuit, seek a marriage license?
Yes.
What happened? Describe it.
We went to the Alameda County Recorder's Office in May, having reached the point where we wanted to see if there was a permanent solution to this problem, and we wanted to know in a more concrete way how Prop 8 was being enacted. And we did indeed pull a number, filled out a form, and waited for our turn, and the clerk that day, we sat down in front of her, and she opened up her computer and looked at the form we were trying to get, and her eyes got really big, and she looked at us and she said, I'm sorry, but there's reasons why I don't think I can do what you're asking me to do. But I'm not comfortable not doing it, so I'm going to get my boss, and he's going to have to do it. So she left the cubicle, and she went upstairs, and there's a long delay, and she came downstairs with the supervisor. And he had written down this Prop 8, the statute, I think, and he read from it. And he was very nervous and very upset and very, I'm sure, worried that we would be upset as well, which we were. And he said after reading the statute, I am very sorry that I can't give you this license, and that I hope someday I can, and I hope you will come back.
Have you thought about the impact upon you of you and Sandy and your relationship of bringing a lawsuit and being a plaintiff in a civil rights case and what that's like?
I've been thinking about that a lot lately. And to be, well, Sandy and I really like our life, where we live in our house and we see our kids and we see our friends, and we don't want anything to change about our life. In fact, we'd really just like our life to get better and better. And when I think about whether or not what we want to have happen would be made possible for other people to have that happen, that makes me really happy. But most importantly, it comes from a place of just wanting our lives to be better and feel better than they do right now.
If the courts of the United States were ultimately decided that you and other same persons seeking to marry someone of the same sex did indeed have the constitutional right to get married, do you think that would have an effect on other acts of discrimination against you?
Objection, Your Honor. Speculation.
Close, but objection overrules. State of mind. You may answer.
I believe for me personally as a lesbian that if I had grown up in a world where the most important decision I was going to make as an adult was treated the same way as everybody else's decision, that I'd not have been treated the way I was growing up or as an adult. There's something so humiliating about everybody knowing that you want to make that decision and that you don't get to do that. You know, it's hard to face people at work and the people even here right now. Many of you have this, but I don't. So I have to still find a way to feel okay and not take every bit of discriminatory behavior toward me too personally, because in the end, that'll only hurt me and my family. So if Prop 8 were undone and kids like me growing up in Bakersfield right now could never know what this felt like, then I assume that their entire lives would be on a higher arc. That they would live with a higher sense of themselves, and it would improve the quality of their entire life.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have no further questions.
Very well. You may examine. Mr. Raum?
Yes, Your Honor. No questions.
Very well. Ms. Perry, you may step down.
And your first name?
Sandra.
Thank you.
Miss Stier, are you one of the plaintiffs in this lawsuit?
Yes, I am.
Would you describe for us and for the court your background, where you're from, your age, what you do professionally, and your family?
Well, I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up on a farm in southern Iowa. I'm 47 years old. My background is, well, really, I lived in Iowa for my youth. I grew up going to public schools, attended college in Iowa, moved to California right after college, and I now work for Alameda County or for a county government as a information systems director in healthcare systems.
And do you live with Miss Perry?
I do.
And tell us about your family.
Well, our family is a blended family with our 4 boys. We each bring 2 biological children to our family and each other.
And their general ages?
Our 2 younger boys are in high school. They are teenagers, and our 2 older boys are out of high school and young adults.
How would you describe your sexual orientation?
I'm gay.
When did you learn that about yourself?
I really learned it about myself late in life, in my mid-30s.
Had you been married before at that time?
Yes, I was married before.
You were married to a man?
Yes, I was.
When did you get married, and where did you live?
I got married in 1987, and we lived most of that marriage in Alameda, California.
And you had no feeling at that point in time, married to a man, that you were a lesbian?
No, I did not.
And did you have a warm, loving relationship with that individual?
I had, unfortunately, a difficult relationship for most of that marriage, but it did start out with the best intentions.
Well, did you encounter gay people growing up in Iowa? I'm wondering how this evolved, your realization of how you characterize yourself these days. Tell us how that evolved from your youth in Iowa.
Well, growing up in Iowa on a farm in the country where, well, you know, the small town where I went to high school had 1,500 students in it, and towns around us were fairly similar. I really had a fairly sheltered upbringing, a good upbringing, but sheltered, and we spent most of our time in our home, you know, working with my parents. We didn't really travel or go anyplace, and that was very different from where I grew up. I didn't know any gay people. I didn't even know of gay people or really even the concept of a gay lifestyle or sexuality till I was like a teenager.
Tell us when you moved to California.
I moved to California in 1985 when I graduated.
Were you married in Iowa before you came to California, or were you married after you came to California?
I moved here in 1985 and got married in 1987, so that was California.
Did you meet your husband in California?
Yes, I did.
Tell us about that. Did you have a relationship with him for a certain period of time before you got married?
Yes, I did. We dated about a year before we got married.
I see. And give us the date again of the marriage?
November 14th, 1987.
87. And when did the marriage come to an end?
The marriage came to an end in 1999.
When did you meet Miss Perry?
I met Miss Perry in 1996.
And how did your relationship with her develop? And go ahead.
Well, when I first met Chris, of course, I hadn't known her previously. I was teaching a computer class, and she was a student in my class, so I sort of knew of her. But then we started working together on project at work and ended up being co-workers and became fast friends quite quickly. And we were friends for quite some time, and I began to realize that the feelings that I had for her were really quite unique and different from friends. Feelings I normally had towards an and the feelings I had for her were really unique and different from friends. Feelings I normally had towards friends, you know. They were absolutely taking over my thoughts and sort of my entire self. I grew up to realize I had a very strong attraction to her, and indeed I was falling in love with her.
And tell us when you realized finally that you had fallen in love with her.
I realized that in 1999, early in the year.
Did your falling in love with Chris have anything to do with the dissolution of your marriage?
My marriage was troubled on many fronts and had been in a very difficult state. At the end of my marriage was precipitated by my own extreme unhappiness, my ex-husband's severe problems with alcohol, and his inability to provide the type of support as a husband and a family person that I had to have.
Did your sexual orientation or your discovery of your sexual orientation have anything to do with the dissolution of your marriage?
No, it did not.
Your husband is no longer living, is that correct?
That's true.
Then tell us about how your relationship with Miss Perry developed.
Well, my relationship with Chris, the romantic part of my relationship, certainly started for me in just a very exciting place. I had never experienced falling in love before, and I think...
Are you saying that you weren't in love with your husband?
I was not in love with my husband, no.
Do you think that you were at some point?
I had a hard time relating to the concept of being in love when I was married to my husband. And while I did love him when I was married him, I honestly couldn't relate. When people said they were in love, I thought they were overstating their feelings and maybe making a really big deal out of something that didn't make sense to me. It seemed dramatic. You know, when you grow up in the Midwest in a farming family, which is a really unique way to grow up, if anyone knows much about that, there is a pragmatism, that understated way of being that is just pervasive in terms of your development. I remember as a young girl talking to my mom about love and marriage, and she would say, you know, marriage is more than romantic love. It's more than excitement. It's an enduring, long-term commitment, and it's hard work. And in my family, that seemed really true. So I thought that was the kind of marriage I was signing up for when I got married. And not that it would be bad, but that it would be hard work, and I would grow into that love. And then I needed to marry a good, solid person, and I would grow into something like what my parents had, which was really a lovely marriage and still is.
And then I interrupted you. You were in the midst of describing what happened in terms of your own feelings as your relationship with Ms. Perry developed?
Well, with Chris, we have this wonderfully romantic relationship, and it's just really grew and blossomed very beautifully. And not only were we in love, but we realized fairly soon that we wanted to build a life together. We wanted to join our families and live as a family, that we didn't want to date. I mean, I was 36 or 37 years old, and Chris is a tiny bit younger than I am, but we really wanted to build a family together and have the kind of that kind of life commitment and stability that we really both appreciated.
How convinced are you that you are gay? I mean, you lived with a husband. You said you loved him. Some people might say, well, it's the this and then. It's that. If it could be this again, answer that.
Well, I'm convinced, because at 47 years old, I have fallen in love one time, and it's with Chris. And our love it's a blend of many things. It's physical attraction, it's romantic attraction, it's a strong commitment, it's an intellectual bonding and emotional bonding. And for me, just isn't love, I really, quite frankly, don't know what it would be for adults. I don't know what else to say about it.
Why are you a plaintiff in this case?
Well, I am a plaintiff in this case because I would like to get married. And I would like to marry the person I choose, and that is Kris Perry. She is a woman, and according to California state law, right now we can't get married, and I want to get married.
You did hear the description before the experience you went through in the summer of 2004, the spring and summer of 2004, where you came to San Francisco, thought you'd gotten married, and had a ceremony in Berkeley, thought that that was a celebration of your marriage, and then found out you weren't married.
Correct.
What feelings did you have during that period of time?
Well, when we found out, well, during that period of time, you know, we were planning our wedding in 2004, and then when we had the opportunity to get married in San Francisco, we were really excited because we didn't expect to be able to do that even. So we did it. It was a great day, and it made planning our August wedding all the more fun because we were planning a celebration of something that had been formalized and legalized in San Francisco. And it just added this amazing, wonderful dimension to our wedding. So August 1st was a terrific day for us, and we loved it. And our family and our friends were there, and one of our kids gave this amazing toast. He said, "Kris and Sandy, you are perfect for each other, and this couldn't have turned out any better." And I thought, well, you know, rock on. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't agree with you more. Shortly thereafter, though, we did find out that our marriage was invalidated, and we received a document from the city that Kris described earlier as saying that it was invalidated, and so I was outraged and hurt by that and humiliated. I felt like everyone who had come to our wedding and had gone out of their way and brought us lovely gifts and celebrated with us must feel a level of humiliation themselves. And it made me feel like there are people in the world that are the dearest and nearest to me that probably felt a certain level of pity for us. And that was the last thing I really wanted to do, is to invoke those feelings of pity on us for something, especially as beautiful as our marriage.
The Supreme Court subsequently, in May of 2008, said you had a constitutional right to get married. How did you feel about that?
I felt great. I felt great that the court thought that felt that we had the constitutional right to get married, and that was exciting. It was also cloaked, though, in this dissension that felt very familiar.
What do you mean, dissension?
Well, the dissension that was sort of a political brewing of some activist groups that disagreed with gay marriage, wanting to put something together to invalidate that court decision.
You mean you were aware of that at the time?
I was aware of reading in the paper about that.
Well, did you consider, well, the California Supreme Court has said that we can get married. We want to get married. We tried it once before. Now we're told we have a constitutional right to do it. Let's do it?
Well, we thought about it and discussed it, and I felt really very strongly that at my age, I don't want to be humiliated anymore. It's not okay. We did get married. In fact, we got married twice, and we could get married a third time, and it could get taken away, and then we could get married a fourth time. And for me, it felt like it made a circus out of our lives, and I don't want to be party to that. I told Kris, I want to marry you in the worst way, but I want it to be permanent, and I don't want any possibility of it being taken away from us. So let's wait until we know for sure that we can permanently get married. We didn't want to do it for any other reason. And we did have friends that had gotten married, and we were proud of them and thrilled for them, and also worried for them that they would have the same experience that we had had.
Tell me all the ways that, let me withdraw that for a moment and ask you about domestic partnership. You and Chris entered into a domestic partnership. Explain to the court, in your own words, why you did that and what that relationship means to you compared to what you are seeking here today.
Okay. First of all, for me, there is a domestic partnership that doesn't indicate anything about a relationship. So it's hard for me to put it in those terms. It feels like it's a legal agreement between two parties that spell out responsibilities and duties, like fiduciary duties that you have toward each other, and those duties are mirrored, some of those similar types of duties that are, of course, found in a marriage. A domestic partnership to me, and certainly the way we entered it, and was really very much a part of estate planning. And it was based upon legal advice that we had gotten just to make sure that our affairs were tightly in order, that our children had the maximum protection, and that Chris and I, for each other, had the maximum legal protection that we could under state of California law. But there is certainly nothing about domestic partnership as an institution, not even an institution, but as a legal agreement that indicates the love and commitment that are inherent in a marriage. And it doesn't have anything to do for us with the nature of our responsibility and the type of enduring relationship we want it to be. It's just a legal document.
Well, did the lawyer tell you that domestic partnership would give you virtually all the same legal rights vis-a-vis your partner as marriage?
I actually don't recall our lawyer saying that specifically, but she did say it's important that you file domestic partnership agreement for your maximum protection.
If it did give you virtually all of the legal rights and so forth with respect to Miss Berry, why wouldn't it be good enough?
Because it has nothing to do with marriage. Nothing.
Tell us what marriage then means to you. I mean, that's the second part of the question. What is it that is so special about that word and that relationship, that institution of marriage that means so much to you that you want it so badly that you will bring this lawsuit?
Well, marriage is about making a public commitment to the world, to your partner, and to what I hope is someday my wife, to our friends, our family, our society, our community, our parents. It's just, to me, it's the way we tell them and each other that this is a lifetime commitment or it's not. We are not girlfriends. We are not partners. We are married. We are. I want to have a spouse. It just is. It's so different from domestic partnership, and I simply want that. And I have to say, having been married for 12 years and have been in a domestic partnership for 10 years, it's different. It's not the same. I don't want to have to explain myself and have in a way that would indicate that there must be something wrong with me, that I wouldn't have to explain myself to anybody who has some reason they may need to know.
Did you misspeak? You said you've been married for 12 years?
I was married for 12 years, yes.
And the marriage was dissolved in '99?
Correct. It began in 1987.
I see. All right, I misunderstood.
Let me
ask you this. If the state were to essentially get out, get out of using the term marriage and admitting people of the same sex or opposite sex of what is called a domestic union, a spousal relationship, or whatever you name it, but not marriage, would that put you in the same place as others who have the same relationship, even though they are of the opposite sex?
I believe it would. Because there wouldn't be anything different. Right now, we are being treated differently. And if the state stopped, I guess, issuing marriage licenses and nobody else picked up the task that would exclude us, then we would have the same access. And if we had the same access, I would feel like we were being treated equally.
Even though the term marriage was not used.
Right. Because then marriage would be something that anyone got to claim as a legal status. Right, because then marriage wouldn't be something that anyone could claim as legal status. I guess you would have to look at the people who were already married, and would they still have marriages? But if marriage was not a legal status sanctioned by the state or any type of government in our society, then I guess I wouldn't have to worry about not having access to it, because no one else would either.
You said that you have to explain yourself. Give the court some examples of things in everyday life where you go, things that you do, where this relationship you have, you have to explain, or that it's awkward or humiliating or whatever. Just give the court some examples.
Well, there are a number of examples. It would be anything from going to your younger son's school and having to pick them up for something and telling, you know, I consider myself to be their stepmother, and I do get Mother's Day cards, so I think about that. They think the same thing of me, but if I pick them up, I have to explain who I am. I'm their stepmother. I am a domestic partnership of their mother. That's, you know, this is who I am, and this is why I'm picking them up, or other familiar terms such as aunt or niece or nephew. But in other ways, just explaining who we are. The term domestic partner or partner isn't really that commonly known or understood by everybody, and it's certainly probably understood by everybody in this courtroom, and it may be people that of a certain part of society or generation, but it's not common in the world. And even for those who know what that term means, it doesn't reflect our relationship in a way that feels authentic, appropriately descriptive in any way. We have a loving, committed relationship. We are not business partners. We are not social partners. We are not glorified roommates. We are married. We want to be married. It's a different relationship.
Are there occasions where you have to fill out forms that ask whether you are married or name of spouse or things like that?
Frequently. I have encountered forms at school where you have to say who, you know, mother, who is the mother, who is the father. There's never a place there for, you know, instead of parent 1, parent 2. Even there's something different. Doctor's offices. If you are single, or you are married, or are, you know, divorced even. But, you know, so I have to find myself, you know, scratching something out, putting a line through it and saying, domestic partner, and making sure I explain it to folks what that is, to make sure that our transaction can go smoothly.
Would being married have anything, would it provide you with any sense of security or stability that domestic partnership does not?
It would. It really would. It would provide me with a sense of inclusion in the social fabric. The society I live in, that I want to have, and it would make, I think I would feel more respected by other people, and I feel like our relationship is more respected, and that I could hold my head up high as in our family, and just our family would be proud. And I want our children to feel proud of us. I don't want them to feel worried about us in any way. Our family, I don't want them to feel worried about us or feel in any way that our family isn't good enough.
When the campaign occurred between the time in May of 2008, when the Supreme Court gave you a constitutional right, or announced that you had a constitutional right, and November, when the voters took that away, were you exposed to the election campaign in ways in your everyday life?
I was. I certainly saw ads on television. I saw bumper stickers on cars, signs in yards, in front yards. I went to a rally. I was quite exposed to it at the rally. I went, just to support the no on 8, but both sides were represented at the rally, so yes, I was quite exposed.
Did you hear things during that campaign in favor of Proposition 8 that were disturbing or upsetting to you?
Many things. Really, everything for the Yes on 8 campaign was disturbing on some level, and some more than others.
Describe those emotions then. I mean, what bothered you on what level and what bothered you on the other level? I mean, we need to inform the court what it was like.
Well, I think folks probably remember the campaign was very focused on protection. Protect marriage, protect children, and with the subtle implication always that you need to be protected from gay marriage because it must be apparently bad, or you wouldn't have to protect anyone from it. And I felt the constant reference to children, it felt manipulative, and it felt very harmful to me as an individual, to us as a couple, and our children, our family, and our community. I felt like there was great harm being done, and I felt like it was used to sort of try to educate people or convince people that there was a great evil to be feared, and that evil must be stopped, and that evil is us, I guess. And as a mom of, 4 kids, I don't know if there is anything more inherent in parenting and stronger than a desire to protect your children. That's first and foremost. You protect your children. And the very notion that I be part of what others need to protect their children from was just, well, it was more than upsetting. It was sickening, truly. I felt sickened by that campaign.
As a parent of 4 children, you must have a strong sense of what a good parent ought to be. You must have feelings about that. What would your boys be better off? Would your boys be better off with a man in the house?
I think all children are, the best things children can have is parents who love them. That's the most important thing. And I know I love my children with all my heart. Chris loves our children with all her heart, and that's what I believe to be the best thing for them, to be loved.
How do you feel about being a plaintiff in a case trying to change the Constitution? Is it a burden, or is it something that is easy for you because of what it means? Tell us about that.
Well, it doesn't feel like a burden. I feel like a very tiny little person in this huge, this huge country that just, well, I just want my rights. And I guess I keep focusing on the federal Constitution more than the California Constitution. So I think I'm not trying to change anything. I'm just trying to get the rights that the Constitution already says I have. So I just want the same thing that I think I'm due, and I think that everyone else is due as well.
Well, let's tell us now, if you are successful, how will it change your life if, given the right to marry and to be a part of lots and lots and lots of same-sex couples that will also be given that right?
Why don't you just rephrase that and stop about halfway? Just how would your life be different? Isn't that what you're asking?
I couldn't phrase it better than just...
Right answer.
Than you just did, Your Honor.
Right answer.
tell us what it means to you as a plaintiff in this case. If you were to be successful, how would it change your life?
Well, I think it would change my life dramatically. The first time somebody said to me, "Are you married?" and I said, "Yes," I would think, that feels good. It feels good and honest and true. And I would feel more secure. I would feel more accepted. I would feel more pride. I would feel less protective of my children. I would feel less like I had to protect my kids or worry about them or worry that they feel any shame or sense of not belonging. So I think there are immediate, very real, and very desirable personal gains that I would experience. And, of course, close family. But on a different level, you know, as a parent, you're always thinking about that other generation, that next generation, because, you know, they're in your house. So you are constantly thinking about the world that the society that you're in, and what you're doing for them. Are we building a good world for them? And I really want that. I want our kids to have a better life than we have right now. When they grow up, I want it to be better for them and their kids. I want their lives to be better too. So I really think about that generation and the possibility of having grandchildren someday and having them live in a world where they grow up and whoever they fall in love with, it's okay, because they can be honored and they can be true to themselves and they can be accepted by society and protected by their government. And that's what I hope can be the outcome of this case in the long run. And as somebody who is from one of those conservative little pockets in the country where there isn't necessarily a lot of difference in the types of people that are there, having these legal protection is everything. It's important for these kids that don't have any ready access to all types of people to at least feel like the option to be true to yourself is an option that they can have too. And that's what I hope for. I hope for something for Chris and I, but we're big, strong women. You know, we are in a good place in our lives right now. So we would benefit from it greatly. But other people over time, I think, would benefit in a much more profound, life-changing way.
Thank you, Ms. Stier. Thank you, Your Honor.
Very well. You may cross-examine, Mr. Rome.
We have no questions, Your Honor.
Very well, then. Ms. Stier, thank you for your testimony. You may step down.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Mr. Boutros, are you going to be taking this witness?
Yes, Your Honor.
Very well.
Plaintiff calls Nancy Cott.
Very well. Ms. Cott?
Nancy Cott, called as a witness for the plaintiffs herein, having been first duly sworn, was examined and testified as follows.
Thank you. I do.
Very well. State your name and spell your last name for the record.
Nancy F. Cott, C-O-T-T.
And be sure you keep your voice up. So maybe we could move that microphone a little closer.
Fine. How is this?
We'll see.
Good afternoon, Professor Cott.
Good afternoon.
Would like to have you give us a brief description of your academic and professional background. Before I do, we have handed you a binder of the exhibits, and if we could turn to Plaintiff's Exhibit 2323, which is the last document in the binder. Could you tell me if you recognize that document?
Yes, it's my CV.
Your Honor, I would move Exhibit 2323 into evidence.
No objection, Your Honor. Do you have a binder for the court?
Yes, if I may approach.
You may, of course.
This is the binder of all the exhibits I may refer to.
So there's no objection to 2023, I believe.
2023, Your Honor.
I beg your pardon, 2323.
Are you offering it?
Yes, thank you.
2323.
It's at the end.
All right. Perhaps you could furnish the court an updated exhibit list. We stop at 2320. You thought 2,320 exhibits was enough.
We kept going. This was exactly part of Exhibit 1306, which we're not going to use, and we broke it out, and I consulted with counsel on the other side. I should have explained that, Your Honor. Thank you.
All right. 2323 is admitted.
Thank you. Professor Cott, could you give us a brief description of your academic background?
Yes. I gained my PhD in the history of American civilization in 1974. And shortly thereafter, I began teaching in the departments of History and American Studies at Yale University, and I remained there, moving up through the ranks. I remained there for 26 years teaching in those fields, specializing in the history of women, gender, marriage, and related social, cultural, and political topics. In 2002, at which point I was a Sterling Professor of History and American Studies at Yale, which is the highest faculty honor the university gives. I moved to Harvard University, where I remain. I'm the Jonathan Trumbull Professor of American History, and I'm also the faculty director of the Sussinger Library in the History of Women in America as part of my responsibilities there. I continue teaching in the same fields.
Are you a historian?
Yes.
And have you published any books, Professor Cott?
Yes, I have published 8 books.
And has the history of marriage in the United States a research area of yours during your career as a historian?
It has. Some of my earlier books in the 1970s and 80s dealt with questions about marriage, but my main period of research on the history of marriage was during the decade of the 1990s. And as a result of which I wrote and published the book Public Vows, A History of Marriage in the Nation. I also published an article which dealt with materials that I decided not to include in the book in the American Historical Review, which is the leading journal in the historical field. This article dealt with marriage and women's citizenship.
And what is your current position at Harvard?
I'm the Jonathan Trumbull Professor of American History.
And when did you first start investigating the history of marriage in the United States?
It was around 1990. I decided I wanted to look at the history of marriage from an angle which I thought other American historians had neglected, and that was the history of marriage as a public institution, a structure created by governments for individuals and for social benefit. And insofar as historians had dealt with the history of marriage, typically they had tried to examine and look at change over time and the way married individuals experienced the institution. And I thought that this other angle was neglected, and that's what I began to research.
Mm-hmm. While you were at Yale, did you teach any classes on the history of marriage?
Well, many of my courses that dealt with the history of women and the family touched upon marriage. But while I was in the process of researching this book, I received a special honor from the president of Yale University, which was to be appointed as the Devane Professor. This is a temporary appointment that one faculty member per year is given to teach a course of his or her own choosing outside of the regular structure of the departments. It can be interdisciplinary or unusual. And because I was coming to some conclusions and I had a great deal of evidence and research about the history of marriage at that time, it was 1997 when I got this request or honor, I said I would teach a course on the history of marriage in the United States over 2 centuries, and I did teach that course in 1998.
And were you able to devote all your teaching that year to the
entire semester, not the entire year, but the entire semester.
Thank you. Professor Cott, I would like you to turn to Plaintiff's Exhibit 1746 in the exhibit booklet.
Are these in numerical order? Yes, I think so. I see 1750. Oh, here we are. I recognize this.
You recognize the cover of your book?
It is the cover of my book, Public Vows, yes.
And if we put that up on the screen, you call your book Public Vows, A History of Marriage and the Nation. Why did you title your book Public Vows?
Well, I've made somewhat of a specialty of having my book titles have a kind of double meaning. And I did so this time in that I meant by public vows to express 2 aspects of marriage as a public institution, 2 related aspects. One is simply that the couple is taking their vows, their marriage vows, publicly before a witness. And that is part of the formalization of a valid marriage. But in addition to that, I was struck through my research at the extent to which marriage was an institution, was the institution that we know it as, because the public, in the form of the state, is making certain vows to the couple about the protection and support of their relationship and granting them a valid marriage. When I was examining what I was examining far more in the book, than a couple's intent, any individual private couple's intent, was what the public intentions in the institution of marriage had been over time.
In what year was your book published?
It was published in the year 2000.
How long did you spend researching and conducting your work?
A decade, about a decade.
Wait for counsel to complete his question.
Thank you.
Professor Cott, could you provide us with an overview of the subject of your book, Public Vows?
Well, as I said, I wanted to emphasize the public side of marriage. And one of the themes that became apparent to me and that goes throughout the book and now characterizes my views on marriage is what a captious institution it is. It is a unique institution, of course, but one of the things that particularly characterizes it is the way it encompasses aspects that in other settings we think of as opposites. The public nature of marriage is very much one of those. That is, marriage is both a public and a private institution. Most people who consider marrying think principally about the private matter. Have they found a partner that they love? Do they want to join in this intimate relationship, which is ideally for life? It is also the foundation of the private realm of family creation, property transmission, and what we think of as the private when we contrast it with the public. On the other hand, it is by its very definition a public institution that the state has authorized and uses to regulate the population, and that the public in the state, through the state and the law, dispenses certain benefits through. This public-private hybrid that marriage is unique, and there are other seemingly contradictory or paradoxical characteristics to the institution that I stressed as the theme of my book. One quite related to its public aspects is the way that marriage has, through our history, had a very strong governance function at the same time that it is characterized by liberty. Marriage is only possible for individuals who can exercise the liberty, value of our citizens, and it has also been, particularly in the 20th century, the realm created by marriage. That private realm has been repeatedly reiterated as a realm of liberty for intimacy and free decision-making by the parties in that private realm.
In forming your opinions in this case, the Perry case, did you rely on the book that you did for a decade in preparing and writing your book?
Yes. That is the principal body of research and thinking that I have relied on in my thinking about marriage for this case.
And since your book was published in 2000, have there been other materials that you are relying on in the opinions that you have developed in this case that have emerged since you published your book in 2007?
Yes, I think that this area has produced other scholarships since then, mostly developing areas that I did not touch on in great detail. And I continue to update my own knowledge in that area. And so in writing my report for this case, I did rely on other books and articles as well.
Your Honor, we tender Professor Cott as an expert on the subject of the history of marriage in the United States.
Very well. Voir dire?
We have no objection, Your Honor, to her being qualified as an expert on that subject.
Very well, thank you, sir. You may proceed, Mr. Boutros.
First, Professor Cott, I would like to ask you, has over the history of our nation, marriage played a central, vital role in American society?
Yes, I think there is no doubt about that.
And as a historian, perhaps you could help us understand a little bit better what you, as a historian, are talking about when you talk about the concept of marriage.
Yes. Well, marriage in our setting is a very particular form of the institution. Human cultures in different places and over time have formulated many different forms of what of the marriage institution. Ours is relatively recent in human culture, and it has its own distinctive antecedents in the Anglo-American common law. To think of marriage as a universal institution, the same around the globe.
Objection, Your Honor. I move to strike this as answer because she has been qualified as an expert in marriage in the United States, and now she is opining on marriage around the globe. I specifically asked her in the deposition whether she was an expert in history outside the United States, and she said no.
Professor Cott, in conducting your work in research and evaluating the institution of marriage in the United States, did you evaluate and look at the history of marriage that preceded the formation of the United States around the world?
I did, and let me comment on that.
The answer is yes. What's your next question?
And was your evaluation of the systems of marriage throughout civilized history, did that play an important part? A part in your work in writing the book Public Vows and informing your opinions about the history of marriage in the United States?
Well, I'd like to answer that from inside American history and some of the awarenesses and sensitivities of the founders of the United States at the time of the American Revolution.
Why don't you just answer yes
I'm sorry.
or no?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Your Honor.
Yes or no. Believe me, he will go on to the next question.
Thank you, Your Honor, for prompting me.
I'm ready.
Yes.
Yes. Your Honor, I would ask that the objection be overruled.
Your Honor, if the court would like, I can pull up on the screen the portion of the deposition testimony where I said, "You don't consider yourself an expert in the history of marriage in countries outside the United States. Is that right?" That is right. And now she's being offered and asked to speak about the history of marriage around the world and whether it's a universal institution. There's nothing of that in her report, so this would violate Rule 26, and she herself has admitted she is not an expert in the subject.
As I understood the questions of the witness, it elicited that to inform her view of the history of marriage in the United States, she did need to make some comparisons of the institutions of marriage in other societies, other countries, other civilizations. And I think that that's an appropriate point for her testimony, but I would agree with you that she's not qualified as an expert generally in marriage around the world. So with that limitation, Mr. Boutros, you may continue.
Thank you, Your Honor. And let me just go back and clarify. in conducting your work in evaluating the history of marriage in the United States, did you compare the institution of marriage in the United States with the institution of marriage in other nations and other civilizations? And as the court suggested, if you could.
Not literally. Not literally. I would like to clarify what I do, if I may.
Please clarify what you did do.
I began my book by focusing on the place of marriage and the views of the founders of the American Republic. And they were very much aware of what a minority among all the peoples of the globe their form of marriage constituted. They were very aware that most of the peoples in the globe at that time practiced polygamy or group marriage, or as they saw among Native Americans, other forms of marriage quite different from their own. And in fact, that was one of the great discoveries of colonization and exploration by Europeans and British people in the rest of the globe, that forms of marriage were so various in other cultures and among other peoples. So that simply from my expertise in American history, this makes me very aware that there have been many forms of marriage that have been qualified and sanctioned by the societies that have invented them.
Thank you. When you speak of marriage as a historian, do you speak of it as a civil institution?
Well, I am, in talking about our, yes, I should say yes.
And now you may clarify.
Can you explain that a little further? Let me rephrase that. In what manner has the institution of marriage in the United States historically been deemed a civil matter as opposed to a religious matter or some other type of entity?
This has been characteristics in all the states of our nation. This has been characteristic in all the states of our nation since their founding, that the civil law has been supreme in defining and regulating marriage. Even while most of the people involved in writing these laws they found no objection to religious ceremonies. They felt that marriage was a civil matter. So much of it had to do with property and inheritance and with economy, things that civil law was principally concerned with.
Let me ask you this. How does the cultural value and the meaning, social meaning of marriage, in your view, compare with the social meaning of domestic partnerships and civil unions?
I appreciate the fact that several states have extended, maybe it's many states now, have extended most of the material rights and benefits of marriage to people who have civil unions or domestic partnerships. But there really is no comparison in my historical view, because there's nothing that is like marriage except marriage. And I would add that in that halo around marriage, the cultural valuations have not been the only thing that has driven this, but rather the extent to which states have in the past century gone beyond. States and the federal government have gone beyond the basic freedom that marriage implies to add many, many other benefits that are channeled through marriage. And while these, at least at the state level, are the material benefits that domestic partnership gives, the states choosing this institution named marriage through which to channel these benefits has itself added greater cultural valuation to the institution.
At the founding of the country, and as a historical matter, were there ever comparisons between marriage and democracy in the public discourse at the time?
This is really a very interesting story. Yes, there were.
And what were the comparisons that were made at the time?
Well, let me clarify this, first of all, that it wasn't precisely democracy, but rather the form of Republican government that the Americans were founding. And their Republican form, small r, was a government based on consent and voluntary allegiance. Now, this was distinct from being a subject of Great Britain. Great Britain at the time did not call its people citizens. They were its subjects. And they had to be allegiant to the king just because they were born there. But in breaking away from Great Britain, The founders of the American Republic were forming a government based on voluntary allegiance and consent. And that was very, very present in public discourse. And they found, and one sees in the newspapers and journals at the time, they found that the best analogy they could bring to this to convince people that this was a good thing, to voluntarily consent to a stable relationship, that may govern you, but it's for your own good, that the best analogy that they could find was marriage. And so in the popular periodicals of the time and in newspapers, the analogy was very, very frequently made to persuade former subjects of Great Britain that they should consent to be governed. As people consented to be governed by marriage laws, consent to be governed by the new institution to which they would give voluntary allegiance.
About how much longer do you have with this witness?
Your Honor, I was about to move to another topic. I probably have another hour or so.
Well, then this is probably a good time to take our adjournment for the day. We're off to a good start, counsel. I appreciate it very much. We will continue again tomorrow. Can we begin at 8:30 instead of 9 o'clock? Is that agreeable to everybody?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. We'll see you tomorrow morning at 8:30.
Thank you, Your Honor, for reminding me. This is a hard lesson for me to learn. When a student asks me a question, I can't just stop at yes. Thank you, Judge.